Good afternoon. Welcome to Spy Chat. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum here in Washington, D.C. So glad you could be with us today. Our Executive Director, Chris Costa, is joined by a very good friend of his, Colonel, retired Fleming Tal Sullivan, who is a former Director of Sensitive Activities, United States Special Operations Command, so USSOCOM. Tal's 30-year military career included 26 years as a United States Army Special Forces officer, aka a Green Beret. As a Green Beret, Tal served in various leadership roles involving direct action, clandestine and strategic execution of our nation's most sensitive defense policies and special operations during peacetime and in combat abroad. This included, in addition to the role that I spoke about earlier, commander of a special operations task force in Beirut, Lebanon, and commander of a joint unconventional warfare operational group. Tal also served as military deputy director, special activities in Washington, D.C. He received numerous awards and accolades, including 5 Bronze Star medals, a Defense Superior Service Award, and 2 Legions of Merit awards, and the founder and president of Defiance Strategic Consulting. And he is a board member of the Spy Museum Advisory Council, which is why we get to see him so much. And that is really been a pleasure to get to know him and work with him. Enough from me. Over to you, Chris.
Amanda, thanks for the great introduction. Can't tell you how excited I am to have you here on the stage, Tal, to join us and do a spy chat and to be a part of the board. And I should note for our audience, Tal is a former boss, colleague, friend, and he is wearing the Special Forces regimental tie. I want to call that out for all the SF guys in our audience, and a few of them hit me up earlier. So it's great to have you here. It's great to hear your insights on some of the stories we're going to cover down. And I must tell the audience, I was challenged to find national security stories because there are so many. How do you prioritize them? So I really focused on 2 stories as a lead-in, 2 national security stories, 2 stories that were triggered by terrorism that are flashpoints for maybe a regional fight. And the first story I want to talk about obviously just played out on TV. We've seen the news, and that was with respect to India and Pakistan, the flashpoint being a terrorist attack that took place in Indian administered side of Kashmir, where terrorists came in, militants, and killed 26 civilians, tourists that were Hindus, so they were specifically selected, targeted, and killed. In otherwise a peaceful, bucolic setting, tourists were killed by an organization called the Resistance Front. So I'll dive a little deeper on those particular organizations in a moment. But again, the idea that we're going to talk about Lebanon, we're going to talk about India, and the potential for escalation. That's the key theme for these 2 stories. So who were these terrorist organizations that were retaliated against by India? So it was tit for tat. India was obviously incensed by what they view as their sovereign country was attacked. So they responded and attacked various terrorism sites. The first group they went after was Lashkar-e-Taiba. You might remember who LET is. In the mid-2000s. They were responsible for a sophisticated attack that took place in Mumbai, India. Lashkar continues their terrorism. They have planned and executed a range of terrorist incidents over the years. The other group is Jaish Mohammed. You might be less familiar, our audience, with JEM. They hijacked a plane in the late 1990s to get one of their leaders freed from Indian jail, an individual by the name of Azhar. They've been involved with lots of attacks in Kashmir over the years. So who committed and executed this recent act, and why? Why? Probably to bring some attention to the cause of Kashmiri resistance, in quotes. The resistance front may very well be a amalgamation of a bunch of different groups. Different pundits have suggested, no, it's LET, no, it's JEM. It's unclear, but apparently this group emerged in about 2019. So they triggered what we saw play out in the news, which was India attacking Pakistan, Pakistan reportedly bringing down Indian planes. And quickly it de-escalated, the region has calmed. That's the first story that got my attention. We talked about this off camera, so I'll be interested in a little bit to hear your insights on that. The second story that we might know less about is what just played out with the Druze, which is an ethnic population, about 3% of the total population in Lebanon. The Druze are non-Muslims, and as I said, 3% of the population living mostly south of Damascus. The Druze also live in northern Israel. The Druze are a bit of a buffer, arguably, between Israel and the Druze population, and the Israelis in particular are very protective of the Druze population. Although I should say that the Druze have said, we're not asking for Israeli help. Why this is a problem is because the Israelis recently attacked some locations very close to al-Shara's palace. Al-Shara, of course, former HTS terrorist leader, now in control of the interim government in Lebanon. So I'm painting a very complex picture, but it's an important picture because it's another potential flashpoint, because there has been some sectarian clashes between the Druze in the interim government, and the Israelis are very wary of that, and they want to protect the Druze because they're again providing a bit of a buffer to northern Israel. So this is a fascinating situation to watch. And of course, Tal has been on the ground in Lebanon. We both have, but he spent a great deal more time on the ground in Lebanon. So I'm interested to hearing your insights. I will pick up the pace to talk about a few other stories that garnered my attention. The next story is about the parcel bomb attack. Or would-be parcel bomb attack, what took place last summer in July. You remember DHL Freight. There were some fires in Manchester, England. There were some fires also in Warsaw, Poland, and there were some fires that took place in Germany. These were the result of what looked like a dry run. We talked about that ad nauseum in the past, and we also identified that Russian intelligence officers, it's been widely reported, one in particular, a GRU military intelligence officer, was involved with some of that planning. We thought that these attacks collectively, pundits and experts and others, thought that the administration, the Biden administration and the Trump administration has privately, it was again reported that they sent warnings to Russia like, this is unacceptable. The idea that incendiaries are placed on DHL flights, cargo aircraft, as dry runs potentially for the United States, that is unacceptable. That said, this past week, just in the last few days, 3 more individuals were arrested. Ukrainians were arrested, 1 in Switzerland and 2 in Germany. So this underscores that hybrid threat has not abated. It has not gone away. Yes. Yes, to underscore, these were Ukrainian nationals that were working, of course, for the Russians. That shouldn't be surprising because every country has their vulnerabilities. So thanks for pointing that out, Amanda. Appreciate that. Next segue is Chinese espionage. We have talked about that repeatedly up on the stage here, Tal. Everyone from Director Ray to Sandrea Wang, who's also on our board. She was at the Counterintelligence Center for our Director of National Intelligence. And Sandrea talked a lot about the threat of Chinese espionage. I bring up this story again because there was a recent advisory that suggested that the United States needs to be wary of individuals that have left the U.S. government because of downsizing, had clearances, and are being cultivated potentially or being developed, sorry, let me fix this, by Chinese intelligence officers. So that's something the United States counterintelligence and security professionals are very concerned with, to be sure. The next story that got my attention took place in the UK. In the last week or so, inexplicably, there were several Iranians that were arrested by UK authorities. Iranians, Iranian nationals, some of them with ties to the government of Iran, were reportedly planning to attack the Israeli embassy in the UK. Initial reports didn't talk about the facility that was targeting. What makes this so inexplicable and remarkable is this happens at a time where obviously Israel is on guard. Israel has attacked Iranian targets. We've seen Iran respond. So it is remarkable that this plotting just took place. And the UK should be credited for excellent, sophisticated counterterrorism operations. The final story that I had an opportunity to talk in greater detail with Tal about is an excellent story. It underscores hostages and the importance of delivering some closure to families. The Safan group, led by Ali Safan, a private intelligence consulting firm that I'm linked to through the Safan Center. To be clear, this Ali Safan, former FBI agent, has been working with the FBI and with the Qatari government outside of the U.S. government, independently, but in collaboration with the FBI to try to identify sites where U.S. citizens may be buried, individuals that were killed by ISIS. That is ongoing, and this was widely reported in the last week or so. I shouldn't say widely reported. It was first reported in an exclusive by NBC. The idea that individuals killed decades ago, their remains are being recovered by the Qatari government. Government of Qatar is paying for it. They have people on the ground in Dabiq, Syria. So this gets back to al-Shara. Yes, he was formerly a terrorist, but at the same time, these are Qataris on the ground in Syria that are being protected by former terrorists, HTS, part of this interim government, while the United States is working with Qatari partners to take these remains and do DNA and to try to bring closure to some of these families. It is a remarkable story. So I'm going to stop there on the articles, and hopefully there'll be some questions. And let me just call out a book. I told Tal that I highly recommend he adds this to his reading list. The book is called Watching the Jackals, and it's a book about Prague, Czechoslovakia during the Cold War, their intelligence services engaging with terrorist proxies. We talk a lot about proxies. We talk a lot about Russians behaving like terrorists, if you will. This is a story that demonstrates this isn't something new. It happened throughout the Cold War. So that's a lot to digest, but that's my 14 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to you, Tal.
Great, Chris. Hey, well, first of all, let me start by saying thank you for inviting me on the stage and giving me this opportunity to talk about these issues, and how elated I am to be sitting across from you and across from my friend. We've been together for quite some time now. We started out at USSOCOM, working some national security issues at that level together. And really appreciated our friendship over the years, and just to say, thank you again for inviting me on stage, and thank you for everything you've done and continue to do for the Spy Museum and for our country. So I'll start there, but I won't go line by line down each article, but there are a few articles that you highlighted that I want to talk about. The first being Kashmir and the conflagration that occurred between Pakistan and India, and the things that I look at when we talk about the event that happened. It's different levels. So at the global level, I'm very interested in the technology that was employed during that action. So Pakistan and India fought each other in the skies over Kashmir based off of the incident that occurred, that Lashkar-e-Taiba or whoever was responsible for the terrorist action there. Major flashpoint. We haven't seen anything like that in several years between India and Pakistan, but in the aerial combat that ensued, the employment of Chinese technology, Chinese fighter aircraft, and air-to-air or surface-to-air missile systems to engage the Indian aircraft is something we haven't really seen before. Yes, China has supported Pakistan with military arms and training in the past. That's nothing new. What is different is that this technology has now been tested, and that has a greater implication globally outside of the shores of Taiwan. So if those same Chinese aircraft have proved successful, and reportedly those Chinese aircraft or air-to-air missile systems or surface-to-air missile systems, yet to be confirmed, were responsible for downing several Indian aircraft, and those Indian aircraft that were employed were either Western-made French Rafale jet aircraft or Russian MiG aircraft. It speaks volumes to that Chinese technology and how it was employed. So it's now been tested. So I know further analysis will be done. A lot will be looked at in terms of how successful that Chinese technology is, because it could have greater implications later if there is conflagration with Taiwan, outside of Taiwan, or we come to the defense of Taiwan. So more to follow with that. And the more regional level, when you look at Lashkar-e-Taiba and the JEM, they gain support from the Haqqani network. And as you and I know, working the Afghanistan problem set, the Haqqani network was viewed as then and even now probably the most violent arm of the Taliban. And they were in very close coordination during our Afghanistan days, are responsible for a lot of violent actions against either U.S. personnel or the civilian population there in Afghanistan, and also carrying over into Pakistan. So on a regional level, that has the potential to prolong the conflict that we have in the disputed Kashmir region, because of the funding and support being linked to those organizations, LET and JEM, by the Haqqani network. And now that Afghanistan is being run by the Taliban, even greater resources are available to them and a greater base of operations to feed into that. So that's something that concerns me as well. So just the protracted nature of that conflict. Looking at, talking about Syria, going down to where the Druze were attacked there, what concerns me is it is now Ahmed al-Shara's show. He is the recognized president now of Syria. So he has to make a lot of choices, a lot of quick choices and decisions on whether or not he is able to galvanize the population of Syria, have a coalition government that will allow for representation for all the different factions and ethnic groups and the minority groups that are resident in Syria. Assad kept a cap on that previously through an iron fist because of how he ran his government. But the reason for the resistance and the revolution that took place in Syria was to bring about that change and allow for more Sunni representation or other representation. So it's going to be telling to see in in the coming days, weeks, months, years, whether or not al-Sharaa is able to garner a greater coalition to support the greater aims of Syria. He has proven himself to be politically savvy, to go from where he was about a year ago and for 10 years on the international most wanted list with a $10 million bounty on his head to meeting with the US president last week. So over that time, he's gone from being an al-Qaeda operative, someone that we fought in Afghanistan, in Iraq. And what comes to mind is around the 2006 timeframe when I was currently deployed to Iraq, or then deployed to Iraq. And he was active then, but was captured and detained and imprisoned for several years. Upon release, moving back to Syria, he started an offshoot of al-Qaeda, which was al-Nusra Front. And my point with that is, when I was in Lebanon, 2013 timeframe, the Lebanese faced a incursion across the border, Syria into Lebanon, by al-Nusra Front, also supported by ISIS at the time. Al-Sharaa was the leader of al-Nusra Front during that time, associated with al-Qaeda. So even as in that time frame, being an active terrorist organizer, coming across the Lebanese border, what interested me now, looking back at that time, was he was approached by al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS at the time, to merge. He rebuffed those efforts and refuted them and said he did not want to be associated with ISIS for various reasons. So that took a lot of political savvy, a lot of just stand up in the face of that threatening power to merge and become something greater and even more of a threat. But I think at that point, it was part of his calculus at the time to be recognized to a greater degree later on. And you fast forward and you see that where we are now as the duly elected president of Syria, leading a country that just by land mass alone and strategic location, a regional power. So I say that, again, he has a lot of decisions to make. He can garner greater and a wider degree of support in the region and even globally if he is allowing for some of those minority groups and ethnic groups to participate in the government. So that's his decision point, and I think that's going to be interesting to watch and to play out. And that really ties into your last article about the Sullivan group and being allowed back into Syria.
Right, that's really important.
And the implications that, or the importance of Dubec, the capital of the proclaimed caliphate of ISIS, being allowed in there in a coalition sense to recover the remains of those victims of ISIS. So working with the Qataris, working with the Syrians, in an international coalition, being able to be allowed back in there speaks volumes to building those relationships. And that's something I want to talk about also, is relationships, and they matter. You said something interesting a little while ago in a previous spy chat, strategic empathy, and kind of tying that into, we obviously build these relationships and partnerships throughout regions and even globally to allow for the advancement of U.S. policy and national security, our own national security interests. But we also have to be understanding of some of those world leaders in those regions having to live in those neighborhoods. And that's important to really understand that they may not be in lockstep with U.S. policy the way we'd like to, or the way it's perceived, but we also have to be understanding of our partners living in those neighborhoods and also having to conform to some of those more regional ideologies. But at the end of the day, those relationships matter. Talking about Lebanon, I'd like to get kind of your input, because I know you spent some time there as well. Again, going back to relationships, the importance of, with our partners. I enjoyed a really great rapport and relationship with our Lebanese partners, but even more so with the U.S. country team, the ambassador, the chief of station at the time, and the other partners there within the embassy to work together for that common cause when a lot of things were going on. And the Lebanese did a phenomenal job at defending their borders against that al-Nusra front and ISIS incursion that I spoke of earlier. But a lot of people don't realize that while they're facing that external threat, they also have an internal threat, Hezbollah,
Right.
and how much of a threat Hezbollah has been over time, although albeit possibly waning now. But I'd like to get your thoughts on where you think Hezbollah is now and the impact that they could potentially have in the future.
No, I appreciate that. First of all, I deliberately selected this article because I knew of your expertise on Lebanon and also the fact that I think that this is a significant issue for the new administration, the new Trump administration, to pay very close attention to. And I should point out I've written 2 articles with Colin Clark, who was a Spy Chat guest, everyone might remember that, on Syria in particular. And the most recent one we'll share with you is about playing the role of the Good Shepherd. You'll appreciate the analogy there. From being on the ground in Lebanon and seeing all the different actors and shepherding them. Of course, the United States isn't going to necessarily shepherd anyone, but we are going to play a leadership role. The question is, and it's an open question, what is that leadership role? The United States, you in particular, were enabling and helping the Lebanese armed forces in a question that always crossed my mind, and we've heard a lot about this in the interagency, is why was the Lebanese government, why was the LARF, who we trained, we equipped, why were they incapable of just getting rid of their Hezbollah problem? Well, it has to do with this environment, which is sectarian in nature, which is tenuous. There's been a brutal civil war in the 70s and the 80s. So you operated in that environment. I would just offer the reason why I think that even though I am optimistic cautiously about the new leadership on the ground in Syria, there are disruptors. There's Iran. Previously, Syria interfered in Lebanese affairs, and they were thrown out of Syria after being complicit in killing the prime minister, as I recall. Right, Hariri? Right? As I recall. The details of that. But the bottom line is a lot of different countries have engaged with Lebanon and really chipped away at their sovereignty over the years. But right now you have Syria that has an opportunity to be more equal with the population and ensure that the Druze, the Kurds, have a seat at the table. I think that's what's playing out on the ground in Syria. But I do worry about an ISIS. If there's escapes, from al-Hol, which has happened in the past, where 400 ISIS operators, I don't want to call them operators, that gives them too much credit, terrorists escaped and had to be recovered by the Syrian Democratic Forces. All of those dynamics are now playing out in Syria. The United States has a leadership role, but clearly Turkey has a leadership role. So I think that we have to pay close attention to the dynamics in Syria, and they're still related to what happened in Israel on October 7th, 2 years ago.
No, you said a lot of things in there that hit on some previous notes. The al-Shura having some decisions to make.
Yeah.
If there is a glimmer in there, worrying about the release of ISIS prisoners and them being fed back into Syria to cause further disruption, he's already proven that he has rebuffed efforts or refuted efforts to be a part of that. So he's shown some stick-to-itiveness to being I won't say his own person, but having his own vision of maybe what he wants a Syria to look like, and it does not include an ISIS, which is pretty positive. Within Lebanon, looking at Hezbollah and the waning impacts that Hezbollah now has, or I believe they're having in Lebanon, is due to going back again to my time, 2013, 2014, when Hezbollah fighters were being fed into the Syrian meat grinder against or supporting the Assad regime against the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, and then later al-Nusra Front and those that were going against the Assad regime. I remember hearing the wailing of the mothers of some of those Hezbollah fighters and the family members when Hezbollah was being fed into that meat grinder and being killed. I think the count was about 30,000 Hezbollah fighters being killed there. And the question was being asked, well, if Hezbollah was created to defend Lebanon, why are we fighting in Syria for the defense of Syria?
Right.
So that was coming into question then 10 plus years ago. And it hasn't gotten better since. And those resources have been drained. It's been proven that Hezbollah, you said you were here for the defense of Lebanon, but really you're not, which is now given more credence and credibility to the Lebanese armed forces.
Right. They have an opportunity to use the situation to really stand up and start being the central actor on the ground in Lebanon. Do you agree with that contention?
Exactly.
So I want to put a finer point on what you were saying, because in advance of doing some of my classwork with my students at Georgetown, we talk about what happened in the north of Lebanon when Hezbollah deployed forces literally to go after ISIS, because ISIS literally came into Lebanon in the north of the country. And Lebanon, as you indicated, they needed Hezbollah fighters, and they were stalwart in their opposition of ISIS. So that played out. So Hezbollah, in a sense, was defenders, but that were defenders of Lebanese. So I think it's a fascinating dynamic. So I really appreciate you articulating that.
Yeah, and I know we don't have a couple of injects I wanted to put in. Some of the things that I'm tracking. I tend to a lot of times look at some of the more obscure locations around the world that feed into this global power competition. One of the things that caught my attention recently was in Estonia, where the Estonian Navy was able to intercept a Russian vessel. Part of that Russian Ghost Fleet, and if you're not familiar with that, the Russian Ghost Fleet are these unregistered, uninsured vessels that operate under the aegis of Russia, but to, under the radar, export oil and weapons and munitions to whoever will buy that. And that, in turn, helps their revenue, the Russian revenue, and keeps them the ability for them to continue to prosecute the war against Ukraine. But the Estonians intercepted this vessel in their territorial waters, which shows that Estonia, being a part of NATO, that Estonia and the greater NATO is stepping up to the plate now. And they're calling out Russia for what they are, trying to subvert international law and norms to keep their war efforts moving. At the point of that interception of the Estonian Navy vessel, of the Russian vessel, a Russian aircraft was dispatched, seemingly an overwatch of that Russian Ghost Fleet vessel, which the Estonians and NATO has looked at as a direct link to the Russian government and this Russian Ghost Fleet. So now there are overtures that, hey, Russia, you're complicit in this. You know what's going on. You know what's happening. Immediately, the NATO forces launched aircraft to support. No conflagration, no incident occurred, but it showed a connection to Russia and this vessel, but then also NATO stepping up to support the NATO Article 5 piece. You mess with one, you mess with all. So I thought that was a really positive thing. It shows NATO stepping up. The other place around the world, not some, I guess, obscure, not necessarily covered as much as some of the larger places, Panama. Panama, I've operated a lot in the South American continent during my time in Special Forces. What was interesting there is spent a couple of training exercises in Panama going back to 1993, 1998. And I remember my 1998 deployment for an exercise in Panama. The year before we turned the canal back over to the Panamanians, it's an influx of Chinese nationals. Restaurants, clubs, what have you, shops setting up new, buying real estate, Chinese signage all over. And they were angling then for the turnover of the canal. And fast forward, we see that there's heavy Chinese influence and has been since 1999 in that canal region. And we've, in some ways, abdicated a lot of our strategic oversight over to the Chinese. I was really glad to see last week, I believe it was, Secretary Hegseth travel to Panama. As a result of that, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Panamanian government and the United States, allowing now for our military to re-engage in the region. We've always had a mandate to defend the canal for strategic purposes, but now having, I dare say, lack of a better phrase, boots on the ground there, but having a presence back in the country and back in the area now, I think will result in more positive engagements, not just with Panama, but throughout the South American region there, as impactful as that may be. But really, really glad to see our re-engagement with Panama there.
Yeah, I agree with you on Panama. It's a vital national interest. I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to go back to one point that you talked about, Estonia. You would agree that's hybrid, a hybrid threat, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to thread this together. The threats that we're talking about insofar as the DHL packages, which, by the way, were GPSs that were discovered this week. GPSs, global position systems, right? Linked to thermite, which is something that we would use to destroy classified if an embassy was being overrun. These are the kinds of things that would be an incendiary on an aircraft. But this is part of a broader hybrid strategy that Russia is employing. So from the tactical to the strategic, we see a hybrid threat that will continue to challenge the United States. We'll see how ceasefire talks go down the line with Ukraine, and maybe we'll have some questions on the Ukraine because I would like to go back to that. But thanks for your outline of regional issues, in particular what you articulated about Lebanon. So that was a great summary. Thanks, Tal. Let's take some questions. I'm sure we have a couple.
No, thanks.
Yeah, we definitely do. And this question came in even before Tal was talking about the Chinese-made weapons that are being used, and it's talking about the India and Pakistan conflict. And this guest wanted to know, China has a lot to gain from this. Is there any evidence that China maybe instigated this conflict?
Well, that's a great question. I have not seen any evidence of that. I would not think that China would want to get bogged down into a regional conflict that involves terrorism at that level, but they can also, they gain by highlighting their technology employed the way it was in the aerial battle that ensued, I think.
I think it's important to note, put a finer point on the idea of Pakistan and their relationship with China. It's really important to note that they have a strong relationship with China, and India views China as a threat. They've gone to blows with China in the last few years. So it's competition that's playing out in Kashmir, but I agree with your contention. I've seen nothing to suggest that China would want to instigate that. But they have certainly a vested interest in seeing how their technology fares, right? Which they did see, arguably. That's a great question, though.
Yeah. Oh, you know how smart our guests are. And this is India related, so I will ask it now. This guest is wondering about the impact of the India-Canada FinTech energy access on multifaceted border conflicts. How do you deal with the proxy military civilian actors in enabling involvement in conflict?
It's a great one. Yeah, very, very complex. One of the things that interests me about that is as India seemingly rebuffs efforts of China to gain influence there, our edge, United States, will be greater economic involvement and opportunities for businesses in India. I can't go any much further than that, but I think that's going to be that again, relationships and partnerships mattering. Not so much in the support of India with military arms, but economic and business opportunities that may avail themselves in India.
That was a great question.
This touches on NATO, which you were discussing. NATO standing up in the Estonian story. This guest, one of our friends from London, said the president of Finland has had close contacts with President Trump. What lessons are there for the United States regarding cooperation with Sweden and Finland as new NATO members?
Wow, that's great. And again, relationships matter and partnerships matter. And it's interesting to me. I have a good visual in terms of region, location. As an aside, not in official capacity, but I was in Finland, Sweden, and Estonia a few years ago because my oldest son plays ice hockey. And he was fortunate enough to be able to play in Finland, Sweden, and Estonia. So we traveled through that region, and I was surprised to see in the Baltic, as we took the ferry from, I believe it was Sweden, over to Estonia, Russian Kursk submarines in the waters of the Baltic, right off of outside the territorial waters of Tallinn, Estonia. So the point of that is relationships matter, and to galvanize the Finlands and the Swedens and the Estonians, and then going back to my earlier point of how NATO has stepped up to thwart the Russian aggression. I think those constant engagements are going to be key.
Any additions?
No, other than to say that we did have NATO senior leaders, to include a prime minister here last summer, I believe, when NATO was in town. And all the NATO members are concerned about, again, the hybrid threats. In Finland, I have seen some open source reporting. That's all I have access to these days, right? Other than talking to people in the business that have suggested that there are concerns on the border with Russia. So Finland, I'm talking about the Finn-Russian border. So I think Finland, casts a weary eye across the border right now as a new member of NATO. So I think that's a fair question.
So, Chris, one of the guests is trying to grant your wish and says, I'm not sure how to formulate a question about Ukraine, but I would like to hear what you two experts have to say about the situation in Ukraine. Because you wished for that, Chris.
Yeah, so I can jump on that question. First of all, thank you for the question. Let me just say that last week we had a function here at the International Spy Museum. We had the opportunity to open up an open source intelligence exhibit on Ukraine. I encourage the audience to go to it and look at the war since its beginning, how OSINT has factored into that, of course, open source intelligence. At the same time, we have a pop-up exhibition that we have temporarily put on display on our 5th floor. Before you even get a chance to go into the Spy Theater, you have an opportunity to see some artifacts, some odd objects throughout history, but also currently on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. And thirdly, we have a Shahed drone in our lobby. That's important because the drones are a significant threat to the population in Ukraine. And just over the weekend, while there was talk of possibly a 30-day ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, it was one of the worst weekends or one of the worst evenings for some time of drone attacks on Kyiv itself. This is after we spent time last week with representatives from the Ukrainian embassy, representatives from the Polish embassy. You were here last week. We had a program, we had a chance to engage and hear some of the stories, but importantly, the drones, the threats, that Kyiv is receiving across Ukraine just demonstrates that I think that Ukraine continues to be in a tenuous position. It doesn't seem that Russia is a good actor in terms of looking for a ceasefire. And I want to underscore, they have put up a valiant defense all along the way, backed by Western military power, backed by NATO providing supplies, a rat line, if you will, of supplies going into Ukraine, and Ukraine very much appreciates that support. That is my perspective, having watched this from the very beginning. So I would just say that, you know, we're not out of the woods yet collectively. I'm talking about Ukraine in terms of the Russian threat. We talked about the hybrid threat. We talked about sabotage, which is clearly a problem. We talked a little bit, we alluded to it, espionage in proxies. The idea that Ukraine has some individuals with Ukrainian passports that are working for Russia shouldn't be a surprise. We have people that have betrayed the United States. We have people that have betrayed the United States in the last year or two to China that are facing prosecution or arrest or are already in jail. So these are the kinds of threats that Ukraine is dealing with. So I want to just underscore that having the drone here at the Spy Museum that was supplied by Iran in a covert relationship that they have with Russia to be used against civilians, that on top of engaging with the Ukrainian embassy last week, along with the Polish partners and the embassy of Poland, on top of hearing some of the stories, just reinforces that Ukraine has been in a fight that's been the biggest land war since World War II. And it will continue for some time, I believe.
Yeah, and make no mistake, the narrative hasn't changed, and the battle lines, for lack of a better phrase, are drawn. So when you look at the support Russia receives from China, as evidenced by the Shahed drone from Iran, North Korean troops, you can see that alliance and what it means. If any territory is ceded based off of any type of ceasefire or agreement that results in territory lost by Ukraine to the Russian, that's going to set a precedent. And there's a lot of concern with the NATO allies and the greater Western Europe of Russia their calculus is to continue to move. So the narrative hasn't changed. Whatever concessions are made are going to result in, if it ends up being Russia with more territory in Ukraine, infringing upon that, it's going to spread.
We have kind of a sort of a pocket of questions about Qatar, ranging from how is the jet that is being gifted by the Qatari government to President Trump a security risk, to are we concerned about the Qataris playing a double game? Are they funneling money to terrorist organizations, hosting terrorist organizations, and also playing peacemaker and assisting with retrieving hostages? So a lot of questions about Qatar there.
Yeah. I'll take a stab at that one initially. And I'm by no means a tech expert, so I wouldn't know where to begin when the requirement is to, quote unquote, debug an aircraft like that to ensure that there are no sensors and all the considerations needed for advanced communication systems and the hardening for nuclear blasts and all the things that go into the aircraft that serves as a platform for the president, the leader of the free world. So there's a lot that goes into that from a technical perspective. The Qataris have been great partners with us throughout the years. They were great partners with us during Afghanistan, in Iraq. They continue to be great partners, working alongside us with the recovery of remains to this day over in Syria. So, but my earlier point, that strategic empathy piece. They live in a region and they have to be good neighbors and understand the nuance that exists there when they are making policy with their own government's in their own government's best interests. So absolutely trusted partners. Have they dealt with and supported maybe groups that we are not aligned with in the past and still do? Absolutely, absolutely. But where does that benefit us in terms of making sure that our national security, U.S. national security aims are met? And that's the thing that we're going to have to constantly be vigilant of and work towards.
Yeah, you made those points so well. I would just say that the Qataris have very much demonstrated a commitment to being a partner for good in the Middle East, and they want to take more of a role on working on hostage recovery, and they want to work on being a regional broker for peace, to include in Africa itself. I think we lost.
Yeah, wait. Hold on, everyone, wait, got to do it. Oh, Chris is going to trade.
I don't know how much of that you all heard, but I was just underscoring, making the point that Qatar wants to be known and wants to have a international brand for being a partner for regional security, not just in the Middle East, not just in the Persian Gulf, but also in Africa. They want to be a broker for peace and stability, hence the reason why they've thrown their weight behind hostages. And we're not talking just about hostages on the ground. In Gaza, we're talking about Americans that were held by the Taliban. So we continue to see Qatar stand up and do what they're doing on the ground in Syria. We made that point. They don't have to invest C-17 aircraft to fly into Syria and put their people at risk to do search and rescue. But I think that is demonstrably what they are trying to commit to. So I think they are good partners. But to your point, again, to put a finer point on it, the idea of strategic empathy, the requirement to understand that your partners sometimes are in a difficult neighborhood. That's important to process while you're engaging with partners.
Great.
Related to that, what are the national security implications of President Trump's trip to the Middle East, other than the jet? We talked about the jet.
Yeah, I mean, it's engagements. Engagements are important. And, you know, how the United States lays out its security policy and what is in our national interest, you know, obviously you prioritize those countries and those regions. So the Middle East has always been vitally important to us. I don't think it's I know it's been viewed in the press lately. Israel may feel diminished in to a certain degree when the president's first trip to the Middle East is to Qatar or the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, or Saudi Arabia. But I think it just further bolsters those relationships, and not at the cost of other important relationships we have in the air, just as important. But I think it's now a re-engagement in a sense, or a further engagement, a deeper engagement with some of those other countries we haven't historically engaged with in the past, and for the regions of advancing our national interests. We all know that Iran is the bad actor in the region. And how do you build that Middle East coalition, that GCC, if you would, to marginalize or keep Iran from festering and further exacerbating tensions in the region? So there's a regional hegemony taking place. Iran and Saudi Arabia have always been in conflict with each other for who's going to have the greater influence. We know Iran is a bad actor. So how do we bolster a coalition within the Middle East against them, and using people of the same, they identify the same ethnically, religiously, culturally, largely. I know there's Shia, Sunni, and a lot of different sects with that. But in the Middle East, how do you garner that greater support? And that's what's being done, I think, is with the president's engagements with those countries.
Yeah, I would just add that I served in the Trump administration from 2017 to 2018, so I supported President Trump's first engagement in the Middle East. And I would argue that the United States is currently, the way I see it, is rebooting the relationship with some of the partners in the region. If everyone recalls, Khashoggi, a dual citizen, was killed by this. It was a plot directed by the Saudi leadership, and Khashoggi was a dissident who was killed, and that really soured the relationship, certainly between Saudi Arabia and some of our legislators here in the United States. So I would argue that the time has passed, and there's a very pragmatic approach to Middle East leadership right now, so we'll see how this plays out. It's a narrative yet to be written, but I thought the trip overall had some good results.
I think we can squeeze in one more question, and wanting to ask about what do you make of this disrupted attack on the Lady Gaga concert in Brazil? And do you see any similarities to other plots on large concerts and entertainments?
Yeah, no, I think one, it shows the vigilance of the intelligence apparatus, whether it be in Brazil or partner countries, to be able to interdict and get ahead of something and prevent something like that. And then feeding that back into a loop where all those countries that are concerned about that level of terrorism or those actions happening against their populations can act upon it. Again, engagements matter. And I'll be brief here, but human intelligence, right? Human intelligence matters. We can have all the technology in the world, but nothing is ever going to replace the human element of that. One would argue human intelligence or spies may be the second oldest profession known to man, right? I won't speak of the first one, but the second oldest profession. But it's that human dynamic. So as much as we advance in technology with sensors and satellites and listening devices, what have you, you're always going to have that human element to be able to gain that information, process it, and get it back in a timely manner to prevent certain things like that. And I can't speak to what was the key node that was able to prevent those events. But I will say there's a human there, and we have humans that can read body language, that can interpret information and get ahead of threats like that. That's going to be key and central to preventing these attacks in the future.
And I'm concerned from the standpoint of soft targets, right? We had a Taylor Swift concert that was shut down in Europe as a result of a progressing ISIS, I believe, and an ISIS plan, pre-operational work that was done to disrupt a concert there. And then you have one that takes place in Brazil that had nothing to do with ISIS, but these were individuals that were radicalized online that were specifically, as I understand it, were targeting adolescents. And as we talked about before we did this program today, the idea of exploitation of grievances, in shopping for grievances, shopping for the right audience, identify those people, and then motivate them to mobilize for violence. It is concerning. It is this idea of idiosyncratic ideologies, which don't make any sense at all. It's not ideologically pure. And that's what I dealt with my whole career, studying and understanding our adversaries, terrorist adversaries, by knowing their ideology first and foremost. It is challenging for terrorist analysts everywhere, not just here in the United States, but when I talk to our foreign partner analysts, it increasingly challenges them. But thank you for that great question.
Yeah, as we said, there's really interest group for anything, positive or negative these days. Chris, do you have anything you want to ask Tal or say before I bring this home? Tal, same for you.
No, it was extraordinary to to work for Tal many years ago and to be connected with him here at the International Spy Museum. He continues to be a credible voice. So, Tal, this was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
I had a
And I
great
know
time.
we have some fans out there, people that were anxious to hear from you today. So thanks for joining us on Spy Chat. And thanks, as always, to our amazing team.
So, thank you.
Uh,
This has been
if-
great. Oh, no, I was just, and again, Chris, thanks. It's great re-engaging with you this way. You're too kind when you say you used to work for me. I learn something every time you speak or every time you say something. So, again, thanks. It's been a great honor to be here.